Hey, friends, welcome to the Heat Press for Profit podcast powered by Stahls, where we are here set to inspire and educate, talk about what's trending in the apparel decorating industry. My name is Dave from Transfer Express and Stahls. I'm very happy to be here today, joined by one of my I would say kind of pals. We've talked a little bit over the years, and if you're not already a part of the Heat Press for Profit Facebook group or the Easy Prints Dealers group powered by Transfer Express on Facebook. Go on over there and join in because our guest today has been a contributing member for a long time where we first got introduced. And as it comes to decorating in schools and empowering students through entrepreneurship programs, when we were talking about the topic, I said, Tricia is going to be a great fit for this. So I'm going to bring on Tricia Campbell, one of our decorators. She is the owner, proprietor, and creative behind Game Time Graphix. But that's the end of the introduction. I'll let you introduce yourself. Tell us and the audience a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got started in decorating, just generally.
Sure. Well, by trade, I am a high school business education teacher. I actually resigned from teaching at the end of last school year. So I'm not currently teaching, but I did for a very long time. And when I was teaching, and this is probably the early 2000s, I started noticing that kids, students, they were ordering T-shirts for every little event that came up. A 16th birthday party, they all wanted to wear matching T-shirts to school. Or, in my day in the 90s, it was you went to Walmart, you bought some white shirts, you put some puffy paint on them, and you wore those to school, so you matched your friends. But these kids were like all out, going professional, like going and getting shirts from some shop. And I'm like, how'd you guys do that? So I just started noticing T-shirts being a more common thing that groups were buying. So at the time I was like, well, I wonder if I could do this. I've always been very creative. I taught graphic design, so I had that background. I messed around a little bit with making like some iron-on shirts at home, and the quality wasn't great. So I was like, what can I do? So I found Transfer Express, and in 2008 started Game Time Graphix. So just out of my garage, my husband and I, we were both teachers. He still is. And we just knew that you were going to have 5 or 10 orders every month around the calendar year, no matter what, because it cycles in seasons with schools. So in the fall, you have, volleyball, and you have football, and you have golf and cross country, and all those teams want shirts. And so do their parents, so they can wear them to the events. And then you have homecoming, and then you move into the winter and you have those sports. You have basketball and wrestling. And then in the spring, you have those sports. And then beyond that, you have clubs, and you have prom, and then as soon as someone's wearing one of your shirts, it's, well, my little brother's in the Boy Scouts, can you make their shirt? And it just spirals. So we just saw this as an opportunity and took it, and it's been great ever since.
Awesome. And so you said you were being a teacher and founded Game Time Graphix. How did you get to the kind of position to start incorporating decorating into schools? Was it because a lot of it was revolving around school events or timely events, or kind of how did that come together?
Well, honestly, for me, it was a personal, it helped my life. So I never really thought about having kids do this. And I really never hired any employees. I was just doing everything on my own. And so I had just hit the stage in my life where I was raising 3 children, teaching and coaching. My husband was coaching and also running a T-shirt business on the side. So I'm up at 4:00 in the morning making shirts. I'm up till midnight making shirts. And I thought, who could be doing this is high school kids. And really, they could be doing this, and then they're learning business skills. They're running a business. They're getting work experience. And so I pitched it to the school where I taught at the time and said, this is an entrepreneurship class. These kids could run a business that they develop, and here's how you would do it. And all we would need is a heat press. Do we have enough money for a heat press? Because that's all we need. And then everything else is bought on demand. And, we start to build up money. And so my principal at the time was like, that sounds like a great idea. And what do you think the curriculum looks like? And I said, oh my gosh, they're learning business communications. They're going to talk to their customers. They're learning supply chain because they're going to have to order and source everything that they do. They're learning quality control. They're learning, accounting as they invoice everybody. So to me, it was like a mashup of every possible business class that you could teach. So it just seemed perfect.
Well, and then put in practice to actually real world. It's not like some mock scenario kind of thing. You're actually printing and fulfilling orders, and that kind of ballooned into a kind of position, like a job, like a company all of its own, right?
Right.
Like the students were fulfilling orders then for the school.
Well, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, so, and we didn't advertise. We never had to advertise. We made our first order. And then, I mean, I would come to class every day. And even though it was an afternoon class, I had the class at like 1 o'clock or something. I still, the first 10 minutes, I called it our morning meeting, because in industry, that's kind of what companies do. They gather around to do their morning meeting and then they go about their day. So almost every day at my morning meeting, I had a new order. A teacher had stopped me in the hallway and their volleyball team needs shirts, or a parent had emailed me and they're doing a community theater play and they need shirts. And just as soon as we did the first one, everybody had heard about it. And for these kids, and I, at the risk of sounding like an old lady, they're different than when I went to school. Kids are busier now, and they are in AP classes and dual credit college classes, and their schedules are packed, and then they're in sports. And if they're in travel sports, they're driving an hour and a half after school for practice, doing a 3-hour practice. On the weekends, they're traveling all over the country for sports. My daughter did it. We live in central Illinois, and she played volleyball tournaments in Louisville and the Florida and all over. So they're busy and they can't have jobs. And so then they leave high school and they've not worked. And so it's like, this is giving them that job while they're in school. So that was
with
awesome
no
for my
experience.
Yep. Because then it's that vicious cycle of, they go to try to get their first summer job and someone says, but you don't have any experience. But then how do you get experience? It's just this whole, so this gives it to those kids in school. They fit it right into their school day, and now they have job experience.
That's awesome. Well, I'm gonna back up a little bit because you said you touched on like you were like, all we need is a heat press. Do we have budget for a heat press? Now, was that that I imagine that was kind of influenced by what you were doing before you integrated it into the entrepreneurship program? But why a heat press over, say, like a direct to garment or manual screen printing?
Yeah. So at the time, honestly, I didn't even honestly know, I don't think, much about sublimation. I've learned a lot since even 2016 about all those things. I didn't know much about direct to garment or direct to film at the time. I learned about those when I went to trade shows later with my students. But what I knew about was traditional screen printing with tubs of ink and spatulas and squeegees and the fumes and the mess and just the sheer space that it takes up. I just knew that we couldn't do that. We didn't have ventilation. We didn't have sinks. We didn't have, we didn't have an industrial space like that. But we did have was a standard classroom that you just need a table to put a press on. And honestly, if I'm being honest, in our very first classroom, the press was on the floor and my kids were on their hands and knees doing shirts, and that's okay. Then we figured out what kind of table we needed it on, or countertop, and where we could put it. And when I started, we had one press. When I resigned from that job, we had 4,
Wow.
and hat presses and an embroidery machine and 6 vinyl cutters. And, it just expanded as we made money and could do that. But I just knew at the beginning, from what I had done with a heat press, and then leave all of the hard work to Transfer Express in terms of just ordering transfers. And even honestly, my kids had like graphic design skills because I taught that. But I also knew that they didn't need to be awesome at it, because everything's done in the online designer with Transfer Express, and they could even hand sketch something and submit it to the art department, and they create it. I mean, more than once we had a student draw a design and sent it into Transfer Express and said, can you make this look reasonable? And it looked awesome. So you're employing a whole other set of artists and editors and things by partnering with Transfer Express. So in my mind, it was the easiest, most economical, space effective, and lowest learning curve for the kids. Can you pull down a handle and press a shirt? There was nothing else to mess up. They're not going to mess up the registration of multiple colors. It's all on a transfer. So
yeah, unless you start printing a little bit too low, just learning the placement of it. And then
the learning curve was super easy for them. So that was nice.
Yeah. I still belly print t-shirts. We were doing some videos the other day, and oops, didn't measure that one. So it still happens, but that's cool to see like how easy it was for them to integrate it too. And then like even the experience, because so like when you were sending art to over to Transfer Express to say, hey, here's a sketch, were you letting the students handle some of that communication too? So like they were learning how to even deal with vendors?
All of it. And let me tell you something else about kids, again, at the risk of sounding like a grouchy old lady. Don't like to talk on the phone. They just don't. I have a 19-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a 13-year-old at home with me, and I've taught hundreds. And 20 years ago, they didn't mind getting on the phone and making a phone call. And the panic in their face when they have to make a phone call is absurd. But also it's a teachable moment. And it's like, no, listen, you're going to call Transfer Express and you have some questions. Well, what do I say? Well, what's your question? Just ask it. They're just people too, and they're going to talk you through it. And so at the beginning, they were uncomfortable making those phone calls, and they were honestly even uncomfortable going up and talking to their potential customer and hashing out details. They wanted to text, they wanted to email. But by the end, they were sitting in the bleachers at a game and someone said, aren't you in the entrepreneurship class? Don't you make t-shirts? Yeah. Well, my church group's thinking of getting some. And then they're having a full conversation with someone. Well, how many ink colors do you have? And what's the quantity? And I can get you a quote, and they're doing all of this business communication, and they're talking to adults in an adult conversation. And they were not comfortable with that at the beginning. And by the end, we even had one of our Hotronics presses had, a little issue. I don't remember what it was, but one of my students got on the phone with Hotronics. The gentleman on the phone talked him through it. Next thing I knew, my kid had a screwdriver out, was taking the back off, sending in pictures, and figured out like what piece we needed to buy and put in there. And they fixed the press, and they would have never made a phone call at the beginning of the semester. So tremendous growth in their confidence level, their communication skills, their problem solving skills too, because, something happens, right? So, oh my gosh, I didn't read the email properly, and these shirts are due, tomorrow. And I thought they wanted short sleeve and they wanted long sleeve. And I've already ordered all of these things. And what do I do? And, so then they're solving problems and figuring out what we can do in a short time frame. And so they did all of that. I didn't do it. And they would call me over to their computers when they were ready to check out, because when they see that they're spending $2,000, like, I don't want to press this button in case we're not supposed to spend that money. But the most common phrase that I uttered in my classroom was, I trust you, just do it. I trust you. No, just design it. Just send them an email. Just check out, just click the button. And they are rarely ever given that autonomy in school. And like you said, the fact that it's real. So if you don't turn in your English term paper on time, it affects you. Like, who else does it affect, right? But if you don't get those t-shirts made for that t-ball team, they don't have uniforms tonight for their game. So it's real. I had students who were homesick and texting me saying, oh my gosh, it's senior night for soccer tonight. The shirts are on the shelf in the back. The transfers are in my cubby, but I didn't get them made. They need to be to the coach by 2:00. They're not texting anybody about their science homework, and saying it's an emergency, has to be done by 2:00. They're just having a sick day. But for my class, it was like, no, this is work. We have to do this. So everything was higher stakes, and they liked that.
Sometimes you like, even in like workplaces that I've worked at, you don't even have that level of autonomy, like to be able to put trust in them and have them do a good job, understand, I guess, the consequences. But like, that's real world work experience. That's better than like working at McDonald's,
Yeah, absolutely. No, they're making decisions. And I mean, you can do it a number of different ways. I've had teachers over the years, many teachers say to me, like, how do I do this? I want to do the same thing in my classroom. So I do offer Zoom sessions where I teach other teachers how to do this as part of Game Time Graphix. Like, basically I'm saying, listen, I'm running this business, and the way I ran my business is the way I taught my kids to do it. The only difference was there were a bunch of them where in my business, it's just me. But basically, I kind of sketched out what it means to be a project manager, kind of like a timeline. Like, when you start this, it starts with talk to your customer, get the details, look at what your supplies are going to cost you, make a quote, figure out your deadline, order your stuff. When it comes in, inventory it, make sure you got everything you need, press the garments, deliver them, invoice them. I mean, and so the kids did it all the way through. So I know some people have done things like where there's departments, like there's the accounting kids and the design kids and the production kids. And I didn't do that. When you were a project manager, you took a job from its first idea all the way through to completion, and that was your job. So you owned that all the way through. And so then kids would see, I mean, those are my shirts. When they're at the football game, I made those. Like, those were, or I made the Scholastic Bowl shirts. Like, that was their job. So the kids really liked that because they were in charge of something. They were the
Yeah, it's just, yeah, you have that sense of pride. You have that, it feels good. It's the, I don't know, it happens to all decorators, I think, where like you see it out in the wild, or you see the whole team together, or you get the photo of the bachelorette party of everybody looking matching, and you're like, yes, that's why we do these things here. I
Yeah.
did want to ask too, because speaking of the autonomy and letting them be project managers, you had mentioned that like by the evolution of this program, you had brought in an embroidery machine and you were using vinyl cutters. Were they having to figure out and select which kind of decoration method would be used?
Yeah. So when we were thinking of getting a hat press, we didn't have one yet. We were just considering it. An assignment that I had my kids do was a cost benefit analysis. So they did all the research and they looked up every type of hat press and why you would need different ones, whether or not you could just get like an attachment to go on your current press to make it a hat press, or whether you want a standalone hat press, whether there was heat from top and bottom or just from the top. And then they were like, okay, now that we would have the press, how much do hats cost? How much do patches cost? What could we decorate them with? And then who would buy them? Who would our target market be? We could sell them to baseball teams, sure, but there's also, restaurants that maybe their employees wear hats in the kitchen, or their delivery drivers, or construction companies, maybe their employees want stocking caps in the winter. And so then they built this whole thing out and kind of projections in terms of like, it would take us this long to make our money back if we invested in this hat press. So they made those decisions themselves. And one thing I did, the kids would laugh if they were watching this. I had this assignment called Friday summaries. Every Friday, they had to turn in a summary to me of 3 things that they watched. And actually, their library of what they were watching was the Stahls YouTube channel, the Transfer Express YouTube channel, or the Stahls blog or Transfer Express blog. And they would come back in and go, and listen, I've never done this, but somebody showed me it. They're like, did you know you could do this like confetti thing on shirts? I'm like, what are you talking about, confetti thing? You take an old transfer that you don't want anymore and it has ink on it. You take scissors and you like rub it against the transfer and it sprinkles down onto a shirt. And then you put a cover sheet and you press it. And now you've got like it's like a paint splatter effect on a shirt. Like, no, but that's super cool. So then they're learning. And I mean, again, when I started, TikTok really wasn't much more than dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was, there's a lady doing this on TikTok. Why aren't we making these? We should be doing this. So then their TikTok feed, their For You page, that algorithm is actually treating them like a screen printer because of all the things that they watch. So the kids just changed completely throughout the course. I mean, they were making decisions. They were choosing different methods. They knew why sometimes we had to use a vinyl cutter in a pinch, that somebody needed a shirt today. In
Mm-hmm.
Transfer Express is fast, but they're not that fast. I can't get it same day, So maybe I'm not going to spend the money for one, right? So then they knew when to do, and that's why they learned a lot of it from going to trade shows. So we ended up going to the DAX trade show a couple of times. COVID got in the way of a couple of them, but we always went to the Transfer Express booth, and the kids just felt like they were meeting celebrities. Like, we order from you guys. Like, this is so cool, And then, so then we learned about direct to film and direct to garment and all those things, but they still liked the ease of transfers better. I mean, that they still, they never made the decision. We had money by the end of what we were doing. We had money. We could have bought a sublimation printer. But they were like, no, there's limitations. You can only print this size, and you can only print on these colors. And like, they still were like, nope, Transfer Express is the best deal. So
I love that, because it's not just learning the kind of the ins and outs of the industry, knowing what to use when is I think a very common question that we hear a lot, and it comes down to profitability, or like the specs of the job, the quantity, the colors in the art, or anything. But then hearing about how, I mean, you took them all the way to even like cost benefit analyses and profit projections and market, like does the market allow, like, can we sell these hats? That's because like that's the thinking that like you get those examples. I'm harkening back to when I was school, and I don't want to sound like an old dude here too, but like we never had they would tell you things, or you'd go through scenarios, but nothing really had that whole picture concrete. You don't see the full picture of the industry and how it like matters to the customer. And then getting that in, these are high school students, right?
yeah, Yeah.
So getting this in high school is like just setting you up for success, like down the road to the real world. So tell me, I mean, when you guys got some money going in and you started like bringing an embroidery machine in, how did that kind of affect the way that the kids were like? Were there specific kids trained on that, or like everybody was a project manager able to source and fulfill everything and operate that machine?
Yeah, so we had our specialists, that were really good at the embroidery machine. And when we first got it, we had to find a dealer that could sell it to us, and then we asked that dealer if they would provide training. And they happened to be a local sewing store in just one town over from where I was teaching. So we went on a field trip. The kids went there, learned how to use it, and then it still, even toward the end, they hated hooping hats. Absolutely hated putting a hat hoop on, loading the hat into the machine, trying to get it to stitch, and getting, honestly, maybe it was just our machine or our inexperience. Listen, I got a 6-needle embroidery machine, thousands of dollars. And at the time I couldn't even sew a button on a t-shirt, or not t-shirt, a button up shirt. Like I don't sew. So then I'm learning how to thread these 6 and bobbins. I didn't even know what that was, So we all learned together, which I think is something that teachers should understand, is that they don't have to know how to do this either when they start. They're a guide, and their teachers are smart. Teachers know how to organize. Teachers know how to, lay out plans. And so you can learn along with your kids and still make it very structured, and Transfer Express can help you do that. But yeah, the kids, they still were able to say, like, okay, well, for this run of things, yeah, embroidery makes sense. But for all these hats, it's for some designs, it was taking 30 minutes to stitch a hat when we could order embroidered patches from Stahls and press them in 1 minute. So why wouldn't we, So, and then there was troubleshooting there. There's a learning curve on that. We had to call Stahls and say, like, these patches aren't sticking. And they're like, well, are you using heat tape? Oh, no, we should use heat tape. And, and then so, yeah, but I mean, they learned all the equipment, and then they made the choice as to which one was most effective, or definitely cost effective, but time efficient as well. So certain things take more time, and even with transfers, like ultra color, soft, or you may have to press for 20 seconds and then wait for it to cool. And do we have that kind of time? So, that went into everything, and they learned that by the end. So yeah, so it's pretty impressive.
That's awesome. Yeah, and then even with all the technology you had, you mentioned a little bit ago about like church groups, and so even like customers, let's say outside of the school, that these your project managers, the students, were also sourcing work for too.
Absolutely. So it started out with just the school district, and we would have stayed busy enough just with the school. I tell people all the time, we were running a full-on screen printing business, doing as many jobs as somebody who has a brick and mortar shop that's full time. And we had 46 minutes a day. That's all we had. But I had 12 kids, or 15, depending on what the semester was. So we're getting a lot done. And these kids were so excited about what they were doing and so willing to work. They would come in on weekends. We'd have pajama parties on the weekends, and they would come in their pajamas and make shirts. But yeah, when they were out and about in the community, it just naturally expanded. We had the capacity to do it, so we did. I mean, we could have turned orders away, but we never had to. Once we started doing all the school stuff, it was church groups and a local bar and grill. I mean, I actually had to ask my principal. I was like, this brewing company wants us to make their shirts, and so it's gonna say brewing, and that's beer, and these are high school kids. Is that okay? And he's like, they're not drinking the beer, are they? And I'm like, well, no. So he was fine with that. He's like, yeah, it's a business, and so we were making like restaurant employee uniforms, and shirts for small businesses, and family reunions, and Christmas parties, and all kinds of things that were outside of the school. And the kids were the source of that. And then it expanded to other schools, because one of my students, her mom was a middle school principal 3 towns away. Well, her middle school wanted shirts, and she's like, well, my daughter makes shirts, so then we're doing it for even other schools. So so it really stretched out after we got going.
That's absolutely incredible. And yeah, you mentioned like you guys bought a heat press originally, but I know like now in 2023 that heat presses seem to be very prevalent in maker spaces at libraries, or even like, because my wife is a middle school teacher as well, and like in their maker space, they have a heat press there. And I like
Yeah.
the high school runs the Spirit Store as part of like their entrepreneurship program. But it's even like some extracurricular stuff, and where she started like using the heat press. I mean, knowing me and being inspired by some of the work that I do, like, well, this is easy. I could bring this and have my students do it. And so she even started working on a program where she was doing like shirts specifically for her like special education department. And then it started to grow to other like teams in the building, to the point where even like the district had to come down and be like, hey, if you're buying shirts, you got to go through the Spirit Store. Like you're taking business away from them. But just to show like how easy and accessible it is for, I mean, even then middle school kids, or like if you're an educator out there looking to get inspired and bring apparel printing into your business or into the building, there might already be the avenues to do that there, which is a great segue. You had mentioned now that you, through Game Time Graphix, are holding seminars and sessions to kind of teach other teachers how to kind of develop this program in their own schools. So could you elaborate a little bit more on what that kind of looks like, or if somebody's looking to get involved and bring heat printing into their own school?
It started just because a lot of I was a member of a couple of Facebook groups for business teachers, and people knew what my students were doing, and I just started because I couldn't field the questions that were coming to my Facebook Messenger. Like, I also want to do this. How do you do it? So I type up this like really long email, and then the next person asked me, and I'm like, well, I can copy and paste some of what I told that person, but you have a specific situation, so let me just tell you. And then I was like, I can't keep up. Like, I can't teach and coach and raise my own children and run a business at school and also tell everybody else how to do it. Like, I couldn't do individual emails. So I just put out in the Facebook group, like, if I were to like do a Zoom session, for a couple of hours, and tell you how I did all of this when I taught, how I run my business, who would want to come? And so I think I've taught over 200, and I think now we're like at 215 teachers in like 35 states and Guam, how to, do this. So they just, sign up for a Zoom session with me. You can email me or whatever. But yeah, I have Zoom sessions as often as I can. I mean, it ends up only being like 2 or 3 times a year, but when I do that, then I say, hey, also here's my cell phone number, text me. I'll get a random text message from a teacher that says, is this the right print method? Like, should I be using Ultracolor Pro for this? And, then I'll talk it out with them. And they're just looking for someone who's done it before. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they're in a session, they'll be like, when I signed up, I had no idea I could run a business with students. And when I leave the call, like in 30 minutes, I'm going to order everything and I know I'm going to be fine. It's just knowing that it's manageable, that the kids can do it. That it's not as hard as they think, right? I think originally when people think screen printing business, they're picturing all the equipment, right? They're just picturing, the 8 arms of a traditional screen print where you're spinning it around and putting, like I said, the spatula with the ink and the squeegees and the screens. But then they realize that it's order transfers and press them on a shirt. Do you want names and numbers? Order express names. It just doesn't have to be that hard. You don't even have to have a vinyl cutter. I tell people I started Game Time Graphix in 2008, and I didn't get a vinyl cutter until 2015. So for 7 years, the only things I made were things I could order from Transfer Express or Stahls. Did that mean I turned away the onesie twosie orders? Sure. But that wasn't where my bread and butter was anyway. I'm a bulk order person. Like, I'm not a crafter. I'm not making 1 or 2 shirts for somebody. Not that I do make like one Mother's Day shirt or whatever sometimes, but my bread and butter is 75 shirts for the football team, 300 shirts for prom, post prom. So I'm in it for bulk anyway. And Transfer Express makes that easy. Can you imagine weeding 300 shirts that you cut out of vinyl? The time involved, I can't even imagine.
And especially when you're teaching kids and there's only 42 minutes in a day, or you're juggling work and then family and then everything else to then, instead of printing t-shirts. But does that help kind of break that stigma down of like, well, it's not like, this is going to be more about being an entrepreneur and learning the business side of things than like, because I imagine some people, when they're like a t-shirt printing program, this is an art class, like that we're not looking about the craft of it. We're looking at, and like, so does that help you kind of harness that and kind of direct it towards the entrepreneur side of things?
Totally. And also these kids, I'm telling you, I have kids that when they left my class, they were entrepreneurs. I had a kid so nervous. He was in the car with his dad. I've known this kid since birth. This child actually happened to be, if he watches this, he'll know exactly what I'm talking about. He was born moments before my daughter in the hospital. Like I was in Lamaze with his parents. He was born and my daughter was born same day, same hospital. So I've known this kid forever. Then I end up years later teaching at the school where he goes to school. So he takes my class. And he and his dad are in the truck one day in the summer and they called me super nervous. Why are you so nervous? Well, because I want to buy a heat press and I want to start a business out of my house. And is that going to offend you? Are you going to be okay with that? I'm like, how can I be upset that a kid who I taught entrepreneurship to is going to actually become an entrepreneur? Do it. Well, you'd be fine if I'm your competitor. Compete. Yeah, go for it. You'll have your customers, I'll have mine. Like if you can offer them a better price or want to offer them a faster timeline because you want to pay to rush it, go for it. That is business. That's capitalism. That's how we do this. So he bought a heat press and can make now, does it by himself. So
that's awesome. I was going to ask, did any students come through this program and go, wait, it's this easy? I'm going to do this. Cause we saw like, especially during the pandemic, you mentioned like TikTok, we saw people with a heat press in their dorm rooms, like blowing up their Etsy stores where then they're like, well, I'm just going to drop out of school and run my own business right now because I don't have time to go to class and I'm making money kind of hand over fist here.
And not only that, they started like the business mindset started coming out. And I was so proud of it. Like one time a kid was, I never told them, like I never ever told the kids pricing structure. I made them come up with that on their own. Like what should we sell this shirt for? And then later they're evaluating their profit. And they're like, you know why we didn't make very much money? Because like half of these shirts were double X and triple X and those cost so much more, but we didn't charge anymore. Do you think you should upcharge for 2XL and 3XL? Maybe you should, and that's a moment that they learned that. Another kid was looking at shipping on all of his invoices. And he's like, I have not been passing this along to my customer. We're not absorbing. Like that was actually the same kid that ended up buying the press. His business mindset was just so strong. He's like, I'm passing that along. They need to cover that shipping. I'm like, there you go. So the pricing structure, they have a total, it's a business class. This is not an art class. It's a business class.
Yeah. And yeah, being able to focus on the business side of it and not all that time on printing really allows that. We do have a comment in here from Beth at Whitlock Morton. This is such a fantastic way to educate and grow young adults into savvy business-minded people. You're doing an amazing job, Tricia. So a nice little good shout out there from Beth over on LinkedIn. But yeah, before we wrap things up, I know that we're already getting close to time. These conversations always fly by so quick. But what would you say is like the largest challenge for educators bringing heat printing into schools? Is it just getting started, or is it the what to use when, or what are some of the largest questions that you start to field?
The biggest challenge for educators is the monetary side of this and the spending and how to do the expenditures. And so that's a huge thing. My school was incredible with literally giving me a credit card. I didn't keep it in my desk. I wasn't going out on spending sprees, but they got a credit card just for my class. I was able then to save that card into, Transfer Express and into Amazon in case I needed other supplies, or into, other vendors where I bought things from. And I was able to buy everything and at the end of the month, pay that off. We actually set up with Transfer Express, we set up net 30. So for our transfers, we were able to just, charge them for the month and then pay them off at the end of the month. For schools who their purchasing procedure requires that every single decision be put on a PO and then signed by the department chair and then the principal and then the superintendent before you can order, that wouldn't have worked for me in my time frame, because we were doing a quick turnaround. Like when this team needs something, I'm ordering their shirts today and their transfers today, and we're going to get them in 3 days. And, so if I would have had to route through the red tape of all the signatures, I would have had trouble. So that is something that I think schools will have to individually tackle. But sometimes it's often, a lot of times in my years experience at multiple different districts, administrators often just want to know, is it working for anybody else? Is anybody else able to skip all the red tape, all the signatures, and just do it this way? Because if we have a model we can copy and we know it's successful, then we can make this exception for you. But sometimes they're not willing to be the first one that does that. So I think that's the tough part to manage.
I could only imagine. Red tape doesn't really help anybody in those situations. And for hearing the stories of my wife looking to do like jerseys for the Special Olympics that she just was a part of, like that was a month-long process that like luckily got the ball rolling beforehand. Because if you are working on like a quick turn like that, ain't no way that those are going to get done. So that's
Yeah.
yeah, that's the and that's I mean then that is that another layer that then the students have to get involved with, instead of just like this is the regular way of doing things, and like this is how like a normal business would be conducting operations, as opposed to
Yeah.
a school with going through escalating up and out. But Tricia, thank you so much. This has been incredibly insightful, and I hope this inspires other educators to get things rolling in their own schools, or just I mean, it's awesome to hear about the impact that you've made on so many kids coming up that otherwise wouldn't have got this hands-on experience. And I really hope to see a lot more programs like the one you founded and the one that you continue to teach to other teachers out there, and just see this grow, because I think the apparel decorating industry too, it's cool because a lot of people don't know. Everybody has graphic t-shirts. We all have screen printed t-shirts in our closet, and like a lot of people don't know how it's made, or the actual industry behind it. And then I mean, the skills that you'll learn dealing with vendors, or actually producing shirts, and those relationships, the social skills you talked about, like that's kind of stuff that like developed early in a real world setting. I mean, it's gonna kind of benefit these kids for the rest of their lives, their professional careers and their personal careers too.
Yeah, I had one young lady I can think of who was the most shy, the most socially anxious, really to speak to anybody, and really couldn't handle talking to adults. It really stressed her out. And at the end of her senior year, she'd been in my class for 2 years. At the end of her senior year, she went on to play college softball, and she was so nervous to meet with her coach in person for the first time, the guy who had recruited her. But she said something about being part of a screen printing class, and on the side, he screen prints, and then she had all these adult conversations with him about suppliers and business, and it just saved her in that situation. So it's crazy how many times something like that has happened.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Again, Tricia, thank you so much for joining us here on the Heat Press for Profit podcast. This is syndicated across anywhere that you're picking up podcasts, whether it be Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to your podcast. You could find us there, the Heat Press for Profit podcast. It is live every single Friday at noon Eastern, and then the episodes go and they'll be posted a week or two later. They're just a little bit behind. So make sure you're following all of the Stahls channels. The Heat Press for Profit Facebook group, Transfer Express, as well as our LinkedIn channel, and both Stahls TV and Transfer Express on YouTube, talking about some of the tips that we talked about here today, like the confetti when you're talking about shaving it off with scissors. I remember making that video, but we saw it on like we saw it on a TikTok or something, and then I was like,
Yeah.
does this work? We have to try this. Get the
Yeah.
cameras out, guys. We're trying it. And sure enough, then it was kind of a big trend there for a little while. So Tricia, again, thank you so much. Have a great, wonderful rest of your day. And to all of our viewers out there or our listeners, please connect with us if you want to. And we are here to help in any way. Everybody at Stahls and Transfer Express wants to see your business succeed, or your entrepreneurship program in your school succeed. So until next time, happy pressing, everybody. We'll see you.